The Realm of Twisted Dreams is a Rift 5-player level 60 expert dungeon introduced in Update 2.4. At first glance, it appears to be more difficult than the other level 60 expert dungeons, but once you understand the mechanics, you will find that the dungeon is rather easy. In this video tutorial, I am going to share the strategies for defeating the bosses of this dungeon. It will contain spoilers, so if you don't want the zone to be spoiled, don't watch this video. I may narrate tactics that are not reflected in my video footage, and this is because I refined my strategies after each of these fights. So if there is any situation where what I say conflicts with what is happening in the video, use my narration as the proper tactic.
Hey there, girls. Did you miss me?
Swindler Maelow was the first boss of this dungeon. Immediately upon engagement, plants will begin to grow in the arena which will explode and deal heavy damage, so they must be avoided at all times. Maelow will regularly emote and then cast Flash Bomb, which will deal heavy damage and stun any player that is facing him, so you need to turn your characters back to Maelow when he does this. Maelow additionally has another ability which can and should be interrupted. Eventually, Maelow will call for Life Ward Bray, who will channel a buff onto Maelow while dealing damage to the whole party. When she spawns, all DPS should switch to Life Ward Bray and focus her down immediately. Bray will spawn multiple times during the fight, and she may not call out when she spawns, so make sure that the party is always on the lookout for her. Maelow will also call for Life Ward Saloa, which is an untargetable NPC that will create a blue ring of fire around Maelow. The tank can walk through this fire without taking much damage, but squishier party members should not attempt to walk through. Twisted Lord Greenscale is the second boss of this dungeon, and he has two phases. During the first phase, you need to kick the Lil Luggos into Greenscale. This is accomplished by running into the Lil Luggos, which will punt them in the direction your character is running. Each Luggo that Greenscale consumes will fill his hunger bar. When the bar is full, he will proceed to phase 2. If you kick a Luggo into one of the plants, the Luggo will despawn, and you'll have to wait for another one to respawn. Greenscale becomes vulnerable during his second phase. He has a tail swipe mechanic called Tenderize, which deals heavy damage, knocks back, and causes affected players to take more damage. He will cast an ability called Spice Cloud, which creates a ground AoE that applies a dot to anyone who walks into it. This dot can and should be cured by your healer. Greenscale also has a breath attack called Roast, which does little damage but can turn Luggos into roasted Luggos, which is bad. Feast is a very short-range cone channel that can hit for over 30k per tick, so it is extremely important that the tank dodges this mechanic. Lastly, anytime Greenscale hits any party member with any of his abilities, he will gain a stacking buff that increases his damage. If the tank dodges Feast properly, Greenscale will generally lose all of his bonus damage during the channel of Feast. The party should try to position themselves at Greenscale's side throughout the whole battle in order to avoid the tail swipe and 2 frontal cone AoEs. After killing Greenscale, you will encounter trash mobs called Sinister Presences. These mobs should be killed on sight, as they have very strange aggro ranges and will try to sneak behind your party and take out your squishies while fighting other trash. Additionally, sometimes when any trash mob is killed, a sinister presence may spawn from its corpse. Grandmaster Atrophinius is the third boss of this dungeon. He has an ability called On the House, which spawns mead on the ground. Running over a bottle of mead will pick it up, giving your character a boost to their damage and healing. But if you pick up too many, your character will be stunned for a short duration. 3 is generally a good number to keep your stacks at. Atrophinius will channel an ability called Binge Drinking, which can and should be interrupted as it buffs him. The hardest part about this fight is an ability called Last Call, where Atrophinius will single out a player who must break line of sight to the boss by ducking behind a keg of mead. Atrophinius will then charge to the player, and if he makes contact, a massive uncurable dot will be applied to the entire party, which almost always becomes a wipe. However, if Atrophinius instead collides with a mead keg, the party will suffer no damage and Atrophinius will become stunned for a short duration. In addition to Atrophinius, untargetable cider ads will spawn on top of the mead kegs with every cast of On the House. These satyrs periodically throw AoEs on the ground which apply dots that need to be cured. The longer these satyrs stay alive, the faster they throw down their AoEs. The only way to kill one of these satyrs is for Atrophinius to charge into their keg during last call, which will insta-kill the corresponding satyr. After killing Atrophinius, the players will make their way to the Winter Terrace. In the Winter Terrace, players will constantly receive damage from a blizzard, which starts out tiny but increases over time. The only way to prevent damage from the blizzard is to build a bonfire. Bonfires are built by harvesting firewood from defeated frozen treants. When a frozen treant reaches low health, he will self-destruct in a massive AoE that all non-tanks need to avoid. After the explosion, the frozen treant will drop firewood. A player must gather this firewood and use it to nexus infuse a frozen bonfire. Each frozen bonfire needs 3 firewood to become a working bonfire. When the players have created 3 working bonfires, the next boss will spawn.
You're as cold as ice!
The Frozen Terror is the 5th boss of the Realm of Twisted Dreams. The Frozen Terror takes reduced damage from players unless he is standing inside of a bonfire, which will remove his damage reduction. The Frozen Terror will attempt to cast an ability called Cold Snap, which needs to be interrupted. The boss will also cast Flash Freeze, which stuns a player and encases them in ice. The party must DPS a frozen party member out of the ice immediately, because frozen players can still be damaged by the boss's other mechanics while frozen in ice. The Frozen Terror can also cast Frozen Rain, which causes moderately damaging AoEs to appear. Occasionally, the Frozen Terror will emote a player's name and then channel a breath attack on them. This breath attack does only moderate damage, so it can easily be walked out of. Lastly, the Frozen Terror will cast Thermal Dissipation every so often, which is a large AoE that will insta-kill any player caught inside, as well as extinguish any bonfires. The Frozen Terror can cast Thermal Dissipation immediately after Flash Freeze, which can result in unavoidable deaths.
You'll ruin everything!
Upon first encountering Lord Twyl, he will cast 2 AoEs. The first one will do moderate damage and root all players, and the second one will deal further damage to all players. The healer should be prepared to toss a group heal in between these 2 abilities, as they can cause a lot of burst damage. After casting these 2 abilities and taking a little bit of damage from your group's DPS, he will retreat into a portal. Twyl has 2 phases, and both phases utilize 3 different dimensions during the fight: Reality, Nightmare Mode, and Forced Nightmare Mode. In Phase 1, Twyl will have a buff that grants him 90% damage reduction and an ability called Nightmare Cloud. Nightmare Cloud is a breath attack that follows its target, so the tank needs to eat it and phase it away from the rest of the party. If Twyl casts Nightmare Cloud while he is standing on one of the pentagrams, he will become stunned for 10 seconds and lose his damage reduction to anyone who is in Nightmare Mode or Forced Nightmare Mode. When Twyl is stunned in this way, all players in Reality will gain a temporary ability to enter Nightmare Mode. While in Nightmare Mode, players can deal damage to a stunned Twyl, but for every 10 seconds that they remain in Nightmare Mode, a Nightmare Fae will spawn. A player can leave Nightmare Mode and return to Reality by using their Awaken ability, and Nightmare Fae will not follow players out of Nightmare Mode. So what is Forced Nightmare Mode? Randomly, Twyl will force a player into a nightmare, otherwise known as Forced Nightmare Mode. Forced Nightmare Mode is identical to normal Nightmare Mode, except that there are 3 Night Striders that dash around the room and drop AoEs, and a player in Forced Nightmare Mode cannot use the Awaken ability to exit it. The only way to exit Forced Nightmare Mode is by standing in a white wisp and using the reactive ability granted to the player. To summarize, during Phase 1, Twyl must be dragged onto pentagrams. Once he stuns himself, players can enter Nightmare Mode and DPS him down. DPS should leave Nightmare Mode as soon as Twyl's stun is removed so as not to spawn adds. Rinse and repeat until Twyl is brought to 50% health. The only added mechanic during Phase 1 is that when Twyl drops below 80% health, he will drop ground AoEs called Pools of Horror that should be avoided. In Phase 2, Twyl will lose his damage reduction and the pentagrams will disappear, but he will gain a damage bonus. Players can now damage Twyl regardless of whether they are in Reality or Forced Nightmare Mode. Twyl only gains 1 new ability, called Conjure Nightmares. This will spawn dragons in the air which will breathe fire down on the players. The players must pay careful attention to avoid the dragon fire, as there are no ground indicators. This concludes my guide on the strategies of the bosses in the Realm of Twisted Dreams. Because I have made this guide after only one clear of the zone, it is entirely possible that not all of the information is entirely correct. However, I guarantee that regardless of the actual authenticity of the information contained in this guide, it is accurate enough to allow your party to complete the dungeon. Short of any learn to play issues, anyways. This is Kriptini. Thank you for watching. Oh, when he does conjure nightmares, you have to escape into the nightmare world, I think.
Is but a dream.
Yeah, see, watch. I'm gonna go into the nightmare mode. Oh, that's not what that is.